of the Pre-Purchase 2 Advanced Housing Counseling course. Unit 8 is on HUD program requirements. You may be pleased to know that Unit 8 is one of the shorter sections, and also you've been through HUD program requirements before in Pre-Purchase 1, so we'll probably run through this fairly quickly. We'll be going over certification and funding very quickly through the types of housing counseling, and also quickly through documenting the client file, looking at policies, guidelines, audits, and reviews, and a little bit on the HUD Housing Counseling Handbook and the 9902 as well. So Section 8.1 is about becoming a HUD certified agency, starting on page 233. So to get HUD agency approval, the basic requirements are proven nonprofit, 503, what is that called? You know what it's called, proven nonprofit status. And interestingly enough, the agency has to show experience of at least 1 year of counseling before approval, and has to prove that they're community-based, that year, at least 1 year spent in the community, based in the community. And the counseling resources must already be in place, so the funding already has to be there to deliver services, and HUD is supplementing that funding through their grants. So the sources are seen in this little chart here for the HUD funding. Congress appropriates the money to HUD. HUD sets up the whole NOFA grant application and then announces the funding and distributes it between intermediaries, state housing finance authorities, and sometimes directly to local nonprofits. Or the nonprofit may serve under an intermediary or through an intermediary, and the funds are then funneled through the intermediary, or in the same way funneled through the state housing finance authority. With the HUD funding and the agency approval, you can see in this first bullet point that an agency may receive funding only from one entity. If an agency were to receive funding from 2 different sources, it's called double dipping, and the second source of funding must be returned. And the agencies may be HUD approved through multiple entities, but the funding may only be received from one entity. A little bit more about the NOFA. The Notice of Funding Availability. The formal application is released through the website, through HUD.gov. They usually happen in the spring. You know, it doesn't always happen this way, but that's typically how it's supposed to happen. And then the agencies are given a few weeks to complete, a month and a half to complete the application, and the funding decisions are given during the fall. In applying as an intermediary, the last time I counted, there were 38 or 39 intermediaries, not counting the state housing finance agencies. These intermediaries have various areas of specialization. I've worked for an agency that does only HECM counseling. I've worked for an agency that does comprehensive counseling, everything from bankruptcy counseling to pre-purchase to foreclosure counseling, to budgeting, to DMPs, and so forth. The variety out there. And each intermediary manages their networks differently, so there's no cookie cutter here. Their application timelines and processes can vary from agency to agency or intermediary to intermediary. And the funding amounts definitely vary, as well as requirements such as reporting to the intermediary and production and such. Section 8.2 another review of types of housing counseling, and we'll just run through this slide. Pre-purchase, we, of course, mortgage default, foreclosure. You have some financial management for homeowners or just home maintenance, but this is for folks that aren't delinquent, just trying to stay on top of things. We have rental housing counseling, homeless counseling, HECM counseling. Section 8.3 is documenting the client file, starting on page 245 of the manual. So we're looking in here at what does HUD require in the file. When your agency sets up a file, each one should include the same documents no matter what service you're doing, although there are a few exceptions to that. For example, with HECM counseling, there is no action plan required. And if you don't have a document in there that is in the HUD list, just an explanation as to why it's not there. As far as, again, going back to HECM files, you don't have to have an explanation when it's already not required, but any document that is in the list and there's a reason why it's not in the file, an explanation will do. So what's contained in these files? The stacking order document would be in every file. It would just be a printout of the order of the order of the files, the order of the documents in the file, first, second, third, fourth, and so on. It really helps to have every file look exactly the same. You want the intake form or the client application. These vary from agency to agency. Need the client authorization forms and disclosures. If you do pull a credit report, which in many cases of counseling it is necessary or required, but not in all. So if a credit report is required, you need a copy. For most counseling, you need an action plan. You need to note what referrals were made or have an actual, say, a brochure from an agency to whom you gave the referral. And you always need your log or your notes for every contact you have with the client, every personal one-on-one visit, every phone call, every time you touch base with the client. File number is important. I'm thinking this is true for all agencies, that the file is labeled with a number instead of a name. At least that's what our auditor requires, that our files don't have the names at the top of the file folder, but a file number instead. Need some evidence that you did a financial analysis and how you did that. Also, you need to note your funding source, how this counseling was covered, how much of the funding came from HUD grant activity, whether you charged a fee or not, and how much, and evidence of your sliding fee scale if you have one, and your disclosure about fees. A loan product comparison, when that is part of the counseling, when part of the counseling is that you're comparing loans, and a discussion about the alternatives. The budget that you almost always do in any type of counseling. Any certificate that you provided, a copy of any certificate you provided to the client. Your evidence of follow-up, those 3 touches that you did, minimum of 3, showing that you did follow up. In some cases it's required every 60 days. In some cases it's a one-time follow-up within 60 days, and then evidence that you made several attempts. And then why the file was terminated and the results of the counseling. On page 240 in the manual, there's a section clipped out of the HUD Handbook 7610.1 where HUD describes that a client action plan is, and you can read right there, it's individual, it's prepared by a housing counselor, and 2 main bullet points. You have identified the problem, and you've outlined what you and the client are doing together to meet the goals. It's the basic action plan. Of course, it's usually several columns with your start date, your outcome date, and that sort of thing. Again, you did those action plans in pre-purchase 1, so you've had, this is probably a review for most of you. Action plan can reduce agency liability. So, let me put that first one in there. These little points here are about following best practices to help reduce liability. You take time to do a careful, well-written plan. And then as you're doing follow-up, you can refer back to the action plan so that you can remember what were our goals, what were our timelines, what were we doing to accomplish these plans. But real key these days, especially now since we're sort of morphing from counseling into coaching, is to not tell the client what to do and not make the decision, but to indicate that the client decided, and these are the client goals, and help the client find ways to meet their goals. And the counselor should never prepare a document for the client, such as a hardship letter or a profit and loss statement. I remember doing this early on and not realizing at all back then that I wasn't allowed to write a hardship letter. We, in fact, have sort of a template for a hardship letter. We just sort of filled in the blanks. So that was something I learned over the years. And obviously, never provide tax, legal advice, in-depth financial advice like a financial expert or planner would do about stocks and bonds and investing and that type of thing. Stick to your counseling role. And here's a slide underlining the importance that of the file management, and that one of the most common deficiency HUD finds in their audits is that there's not even an action plan there, or it's very incomplete. One of the agencies I'm familiar with nearby, where near me here, was dinged for having action plans that were very similar. It was again kind of like that template sort of idea where they had the same sort of goals and they just sort of changed up the names. So you want this to be, you want your action plan, of course, to be tailored to your particular client. There is a sample action plan, one in the book that's filled in, and a blank one in case you want to use it, or of course you can develop your own action plan also in your agency. Here's some tips for maintaining files. Oh, we're out of order here again. The first one is to be consistent in how the documents are placed in the file, so that when you go to get a file, you know what to expect, and everyone does it the same way, and it's all in the same order each time. And you take the file in the same order from the first point of contact all the way through to closing the file. You don't want to keep those loose items all over the place and think, well, quote unquote, later I'll get to them, and try to figure out when you're going to find time to file. It builds up, it becomes overwhelming. Believe me, I've been there. So just always file the paper. You know, touch it once, file it, and then it's there if you need it later. Keep all your notes in one place in the file, and document your notes regularly. Of course, we're going to all electronic filing now, so I think it's a little easier. Just while you're doing your action, whether it's on the phone or if you can do it without neglecting the client, make the note at the time and keep up with it on a daily basis. Use the same follow-up system, and at least use a follow-up system. For example, you make 2 phone call attempts and then 1 attempt by letter, email, postcard, or something like that, and get your 3 touches in. Closing files in a timely manner is important because this helps you get paid for what you do. If you don't do the 3-touch follow-ups rule, people hang on forever, the file never gets closed, and you don't get recognition monetarily or otherwise for your work. Whoa, there's the Terminator. So at the bottom of there, that last point is document everything, and what it's talking about is before you terminate a file, make those attempts and somehow let the client know that you're trying to reach them and that if you don't hear from them by a certain time, you will close the file. Again, send a letter or a postcard or send an email. Section 8.4 is concerning policies, starting page 243. The new HUD handbook states that files must be stored in a locked cabinet. There's a little note here to know where the key is because one of the writers of this course actually had an audit, and yeah, they did the right thing. They locked everything up, but when HUD went to recover some files, or the auditor went to get files out of that cabinet, they couldn't even find the key. So it was a little bit of a moment there. You must store the files for at least 3 years, and they must, be kept. Typically, agencies keep in a locked file cabinet in a locked room. Your subsidy programs may have separate requirements for storage. Maybe they require you to keep it longer, so check on that. And then once you've kept the files for as long as you're required to, then you must shred everything that contains confidential information. You may be able to partner up with some of your local lenders. They may have access to or their own commercial shredder, which can help you save on time and money. And have your policy written out so that everybody has it there in writing on how the files are going to be stored and maintained and shredded when and where and what time and all the details every counselor needs to know. So according to HUD, that every agency must be able to provide counseling and not education alone. So this next point is kind of maybe just redundant, but maybe it's just meant to say it in a different way, so you make sure to catch it. That an agency that offers education on a topic, any topic, must also provide counseling on that topic as well. So what are we talking about, education and counseling? We're usually here with education talking about group education. So if you offer homebuyer ed in a group, then you are required also to be able to go one-on-one with the folks who attended your education, your homebuyer ed, and help them with their housing issues on a one-on-one basis. You must be in compliance with the HUD approved work plan that you developed, and you must also stay in the area that was specified in your approved work plan. If you're saying you're covering these counties or this area, you must stay within that area. In terms of where to counsel, it has to be a private space. That can be difficult for very small agencies who are working with cubicles. Cubicles really aren't private and aren't allowed. Some people say you can write to HUD and ask for approval to work in a cubicle, but don't expect to get an okay or even to get an answer. You need rooms with doors. So this may happen at your agency, or you could go to a client's home, an alternate location, or maybe a place of worship that has private locations or somewhere else. Of course, if you do home visits, that's another issue because of time, cost, liability, and that sort of thing. Most agencies I know that do home visits require that 2 counselors go together, and that increases the cost, of course, and time. It's also allowed by HUD that you do counseling through an alternate format over the internet, for example, Skype. So as long as it's private and the location is mutually acceptable to the counselor and the client, then those are the 2 primary things that matter. More about locations. Wherever you are, you have to have access to a computer or copier. Actually, there are times where I've done a counseling in somebody's home, I even did a counseling session once sitting in somebody's car. But I was able to go back to my office then and use the computer and scanner and copier and that type of thing. The building must be accessible to people with disabilities, have entrance ramps and elevators, office space that's accessible. And if you don't have it in your building, then you have to find an alternate location where you can meet these guidelines. Here are some more considerations: that the federally funded organizations and nonprofits must comply with the HUD's Limited English Proficiency Guidance, the LEPs there. So that means the agency makes a reasonable effort to provide language assistance. That could mean that you hire somebody who speaks the language of your clientele, the general language in your area, or that you have access to interpretation. So this, it goes beyond language. It also goes to the hearing impaired. And or you form a partnership with an organization that offers these services. It can be expensive, those interpretation services, so partnerships can be a good way to accomplish that need. Section 8.5, the reporting guidelines, starting on page 245. Agencies that are certified directly through HUD, as you know, are required to submit quarterly reports in addition to the 9902. And these requirements will be laid out in the grant agreement. So if you're the one doing the reporting, you will probably already know about that. Through the intermediary, of course, HUD reporting is required there also. And this intermediary has their additional requirements and deadlines. And this is the case in my agency. The intermediary submits the reports for my particular agency, which is sub-grantee. So that's how it works for some. Now, the HCS, the Housing Counseling System, and the 9902. On the 9902, HUD's getting a snapshot of the volume of clients that you're serving, who you're serving, what your goal was, did you meet that goal, and within a certain timeline. These are done on a quarterly basis. The HCS is an online database managed by HUD, storing the information there, and the 9902 is submitted through the HCS. Now, in your book, if they haven't updated it yet, you might have this image of the former 9902. This is how it used to look, and that would be on page 246. But it could be that your manual's been updated. I believe in pre-purchase 1, I looked at that a couple weeks ago, and it was updated to the new 9902. But these slides had not been updated when they were passed on to me. So what I did is I just went to this website. I just Googled this and found that there's a PDF. It's really a PowerPoint that HUD did to introduce folks to the new agencies to the new 9902. So if you wish, you can stop the recording at this point and write down that site there. Or you can just Google it yourself, or maybe you've already seen it and you're already working with it, so you don't really need this. But some of the changes are that subcategories were eliminated. The other category was eliminated for individual counseling. And now we can have multiple outcomes, and the more the better is what I hear for the same household. So if you did a budget and you referred them to social services and you found a grant for them and so forth and so on, you can have multiple outcomes for the same household. They've added this LEP and rural status section. And some of the specific changes are that now there are 3 columns of data. You still have you have the all activities, all the counseling and education activities, and then you have the HUD grant section for grantees only, where you have a column for what your actual results were, That's the first column, and then the second column is what you projected. So they're going to compare what you projected to what actually happened. And there is the addition of the homeless prevention workshop under the group education section. And they've separated the purpose from visits and results, like why they came and then what the result was. And they've created this impact and scope of counseling. Well, let me just back up a little bit. So, well, I think that's it. That's everything on the, I was looking through my notes here that I took when I saw that the slides were from the old form. That's enough. Okay, going on to section 8.6, audits or biannual reviews, starting on page 253. HUD conducts these reviews every 2 years. You can find the audit form in Blackboard. You know, HUD will let you know ahead of time what they're auditing when they're coming, and sometimes ask, you'll know what files they're going to be auditing ahead of time. This audit covers all these areas we've discussed in the class here, and what's in the file, you know, especially what we looked at, what needs to be in the file. If you're not sure, contact your HUD rep. So these last two slides are some kind of long sentences related to grants and other grants outside of the HUD grants and how they relate to the HUD grants. So here's a long sentence you can read, or I'll just read it to you here. The course we just looked at has been based on the current HUD requirements. Those can change, as you know. And there are a multitude of grant funding sources. There are a multitude of sources out there. So this course can't possibly begin to cover everything out there and dissect each one of those. For example, there are many agencies who are or did receive funding through the NFMC program. I understand that that's nearly gone or over in some areas. Our agency never did participate in that, so I'm not very familiar with that, but that grant may have different requirements and different layers. And a little more here, that as an agency, it's crucial to realize that the requirements of a particular grant program may be more or less stringent than what HUD requires, but if it's less stringent, each file still has to meet the same standard as any HUD file. So you can't do no matter what the other grants say, you can always they can always be more stringent, but if they're less stringent, you still have to meet all the standards of that any HUD file has. Here's an example. If you have a different grant and it doesn't require you to follow up every 60 days, you're still required to do it. And that this holds the same for any other activities, such as creating the action plans and what's in the file and so forth. So that finishes up Unit 8, and you're very close to the end of the course. Hoping it's going well. Good luck to all of you. Take care.